I thought that I could start with maybe an initiating thought, particularly to Nick Fuentes on the question of your racial awareness, because I saw some of your tweets today, and you were saying that calling you a white nationalist is a lie, that you don't self-label as this, you don't identify as this. However, you are racially aware. So I was wondering, what is your position on what constitutes your identity and what constitutes the best form of identitarianism that a society can pursue right now?
Sure, that's a great question. I was talking about that earlier today because, of course, there was a big hit piece about me in Right Wing Watch by Jared Holt. We're all a big fan of Jared Holt around here because I attended the American Renaissance Conference this weekend. And the reason I wouldn't call myself a white nationalist, it's not because I don't see the necessity for white people to have a homeland and for white people to have a country. It's because I think that kind of terminology is used almost exclusively by the left to defame. And I think the terminology and the labels that we use, I don't think we can look at them outside of the context of their connotations in America. Whereas maybe it might be descriptive to call somebody a white nationalist. I think it sort of loses something when an average person hears that and it's almost synonymous with Nazi or villain or whatever. And so I would say I'm a white person. I'm conscious of my white identity, conscious of nationalism. But I think in a way it's almost redundant to say that you're a white nationalist. We know that the word nation almost implicitly talks about ethnicity and biology. If you go back to the history of the word, a nation is not synonymous with country or state. Nation itself means a people. So I think if I call myself a nationalist, it's almost implicit in that word that it's, America does have a heritage of being a European country. So that a little bit about the wording, because I know a lot of people would be confused by that, but that's really how I see myself.
All right. Now, Richard, on your side, you are a racial identitarian. It seems that you put the existence of the white race as one of your first value. Is it your first approximation that Nick's view does not contradict your view?
What Nick just said, I would not contradict at all. I think what he just said is a down-to-earth, basic conservatism, nationalism. I wish there were more conservatives like Nick as opposed to conservatives who get excited by Bibi Netanyahu ordering our country to bomb his racial enemies, to be honest. So I have no major problem. I certainly would define myself differently than Nick does. For some time, I've called myself an identitarian. And I would say that right now, if you hear that, if you hear that word identitarian, if it means anything to you at all, it's probably a method of activism more than anything. Martin Zellner actually and his group had a big coup recently where they, went to the French Alps and things like that. And I would have loved to be there. I would have probably gone skiing and missed the whole activism event, but although it is late to be doing that. But anyway, I think people have associated it with that. It's kind of a younger form of nationalist and hipper, and people engage in kind of flash mob-like things. And that's fine. But the identitarianism is, it's not a great marketing term. It brings about confusion more than anything else. That's why I think marketing terms like alt-right or even just simply calling yourself a conservative or what have you, that's probably just simply better. But I do think that it's a good term and it's a meaningful one. The left is, what made the left across the 19th century and into the 20th was a basis in class consciousness and a basis in national and indeed world revolution. So that was effectively their starting point. When you talk about the conservatism, and when you say that word, it's hard to get away from the American conservative movement. The term conservative was actually in ill repute up until the 1950s. It was not regularly used. It's very interesting. In the election of 1960, John F. Kennedy called himself a fighting conservative, and Richard Nixon called himself something. He says, I'm a rational liberal or something, and so it was a kind of reversal type thing. But that word was not in good standing, and it was brought into good standing by William F. Buckley and his movement that developed around National Review since the 1950s. And so whereas the left had a basis in class consciousness and world revolution, the right, it had a fuzzier basis. They seemed to be based in the Constitution or in vague kind of generic Christian values, or if you want to be a little more critical and cynical, as I would be, they were based in a kind of mirror reflection of Marxism. They were based in a global revolution for capitalism and an attempt to roll back the Soviet Union, better dead than red. That's what all the young conservatives chanted. So that was the basis of the right, and the identitarianism is attempting something new. You could also connect this back with Alexander Dugin's fourth political theory. Dugin has talked about there are three major political theories of the 20th century. There's liberalism, which came first. There is Marxism, communism, and then there's fascism, which is a reaction in many ways. And it was that older ideology which has actually lasted, whereas fascism and communism have, I hate to use this terminology, they've gone into the dustbin. So that fourth political theory is this openness to a new beginning, and identitarianism I think is a kind of answer to that question. So the basis of a political thought has to start with a concept of identity, and from there you move outward. And what is identity? We have some personal affinities. We have a national identity. I have a passport. I pay taxes. And so on. I speak a language. I was born in Massachusetts. I grew up in Dallas, Texas. Those are all, we're getting into deeper. But I would say at the basis of identity is race, and within race there is ethnicity. And ethnicity can very often contradict with, it can't, well, I'll say that. It shouldn't contradict with race, but ethnicity can be a kind of contradictory thing. There are nations within nation states. There are nations that stretch between nation states. This 19th century ideal of an equation between the state and the nation, which was this democratic ideal, is not always perfect. There are many Frances, there are many Britons, there are many Americas, certainly to be sure. But if you could say that we could spread out to that widest form of identity, a true basis, it is race. And within that there are concentric circles. Sometimes these concentric circles are in conflict, but I think generally speaking, we try to get away from that. So whereas the left began with a consciousness of class revolt and world revolution, we are going to start in identity. Whereas conservatives, and turn the left, I don't know where the left is starting at this point. They're starting in like elective lifestyle, bisexual transhumanism or something. I mean, who knows where the left is now? It's not based in class in a way. But we want to be based on identity. That's our starting point. And so when we talk about issues, when we talk about foreign policy, when we talk about economics, we might reach unusual, you could even say ad hoc solutions. I'm not inherently opposed to socialism. I might disagree with socialism, but on occasion, but I'm not inherently ideologically opposed to it. The real question is this servicing the flourishing of our people and our greater race?
I'd like to hear from both of you your answer to identity from the left, because the left plays on identity. As you mentioned, Richard, it plays on the class identity. It also plays on racial identity, and it plays on gender and sexual identity around the LGBT movement. What should be the answer from the right to this? Destroy this identity, or respect it, or undermine it, or go along with it?
Yeah,
Very good question. I'll let Nick go first.
Yeah, sure. I think it is kind of interesting because you do see with the right and the left, there is this idea that the left embraces identity politics. This is what the Ben Shapiros of the world say. This is what the conservative establishment, Conservative Inc. says, that the left embraces identity. And I think there is part of the right which can be seen. I think that's why you get people like Mike Tokes and Ali Akbar who call me a leftist, because they say it's the same identity politics. But I think, to Richard's point about the fourth position, about this new identitarian place that we're entering, I do think we see an ideology of difference as opposed to sameness. I think what the right and the left have in common in their universalism is a rejection of difference in terms of gender, in terms of race. You know, we see both the right and the left embrace the idea that women and men are basically the same. You know, you'll have conservatives say that men and women are different, but are they really? Because they both encourage them to have the same exact functions in society. They both believe they should both be in the workforce, and feminism is okay in certain places, right? And on race, they both say we're all equal, we're all pink on the inside, both the right and the left. And so I think that kind of speaks to Richard's point and Alexander Dugin's essay, or his theory about the fourth political theory, which is we're moving into a new age where you have this global clash of civilizations, of all these different peoples coming together, coming into conflict, religions, ethnicities, nations, civilizations, where we're going to have to, I think, assert an identity very strongly. And I think it's grounded in race. I think it's grounded in biology. I think there's a cultural component as well, but I think that has got to be the answer to that from the right. I don't think it's going to be sufficient that we have kind of this milquetoast feminism, this milquetoast kind of racial egalitarianism. I don't think that's a sufficient answer for the left, because it's not rooted in reality. We know that in reality, things like gender, race, all the rest are firmly grounded in science. They're firmly grounded. You know, I was at American Renaissance. JF, you're a biologist. We know that scientifically these things are real. And so I think if we have that kind of, and I would describe myself with the adjective identitarian. I wouldn't say I'm like a noun and identitarian. I think we would have to, in some way, affirm that identity as real. So I think I'm in agreement there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Nick just said. I would add that there is this interesting dialectic within the left, and so on the one hand, there is a quest for homogeneity, indeed global homogeneity, sameness. We're all one world. It does, its skin color is just that. It's almost like putting on a new fragrance of perfume, or say it has no more implications than that skin color. And so there is that quest towards globalism and an inherent individualism as well, which is at the heart of the left. And those two things are obviously not in contradiction. Their version of individualism is, of course, consumer choice, sexual predilections, career, kind of thing. But then at the same time, within the left, they have a kind of, there's a kind of otherness to them, in the sense that the left has to engage in identity politics. Now, it will not ever, probably ever, engage in white identity politics. I think a lot of people have even told me, they're like, Richard, you've got to tone down your harsh rhetoric. And you should say, I'm a white person. I just want a seat at the multi-culti table. Like, hey, hey, y'all, we're all in this together type thing. I'm not religiously opposed to doing that, maybe on occasion, but that's not going to work. So they will not allow whites to have identity. But at the same time, the left has its own quest for authenticity. And so when you tell a black person, like, conservatives are always lecturing black people, get rid of this identity politics stuff. You're an American citizen just like me. And a lot of the left, I think they're right when they say no. That's an African American. He has a fundamentally different experience. And again, I don't want anyone to take this like I'm endorsing the left or something. What I'm saying is that just because they're generally speaking wrong and awful doesn't mean that they're not actually getting at something that conservatives aren't. That conservatives want to ignore, just willfully ignore the identity question and pretend that all our questions can be answered through economics, basically. Ben Shapiro is like, what you don't understand here, folks, is that actually capitalism is the most anti-racist system. So the left should actually embrace my positions. You're welcome, liberals. QED. That's basically how conservatives argue. And they take liberal assumptions and they're like, oh, don't you see how actually conservative free market principles lead to your ends? I mean, it's incredible that they don't recognize this. So the left is actually...
After Alex Jones' imitation of Ben Shapiro, we now have a Richard Spencer imitation of Ben Shapiro. Now, what you're suggesting is almost in line with Sargon of Akkad's horseshoe theory. He's saying what the alt-right will do ultimately is they will be right-wing SJWs, which to me is not bad at all. I think just like you, Richard, that there is something true in the left saying yes, a black person is different and they have different needs and different experiences. Do you take issue with being called a proponent of horseshoe theory?
I mean, look, I obviously chafe when I'm called, oh, you're a right-wing SJW or whatever. They're just attempting to win the argument by calling us names. But I would actually stand by what I just said. Yes, there is a way. It's not a horseshoe theory where like the right and the left meet and they're the same or whatever in like National Socialist Stalinism or whatever. But that doesn't mean that there isn't something to the left. We can grant them something in our debate with them. And now, again, I'm not saying they're good at all. I actually attended a Georgetown lecture. It was recently. It was rather funny, and I was reminded why I'm so happy to be out of academia. There was this just big, stodgy, kind of puritanical-looking lesbian who went on stage, and she was just mouthing all these religious things. I mean, because it really is a kind of religion. You have to speak the catechism, pray to the gods, make some offerings, and so she said this word salad of like. She actually mentioned the word identitarian. I think that's kind of in there. But she was saying, we who will achieve a diversity within unity and togetherness and a kind of activism that brings about a true authenticity. It was just, I was like, my head was hurting. But the fact is, these people are terrible. They're ridiculous. But they might actually be getting at something. And the left kind of needs that to ground itself. If it's purely about just globalism, no one would want to be a part of it. It's awful. Who wants to be a part of the global free market? I mean, it's fine, I guess, on certain discrete realms of I don't mind buying a car made in Germany or a leather olive oil made in Italy or something. Oh, that's great free market. Thank you very much. But in terms of just becoming part of this global order, no one wants that. And so the left kind of needs to tap into identity because it's real and authentic and it has an emotional quality to us. So I think the right should tap into that too. We need to take what works from the left and tap into that authenticity and those emotions.
Yeah, true. And I remember during the State of the Union, I'll never forget, this was really, I think, a powerful symbol for what we're talking about. At the State of the Union, all the black congressmen showed up to the address and they were wearing some kind of traditional, African scarf or something, some very colorful, wonderful, rich and spicy piece from the Botswanan collection. But I remember it was distinct, and it was to distinguish themselves from everybody else. It was to remind them, and it was a left-wing thing, but it was to say, we are different from you. We are African American. And I talk about this on my show a lot. There's this talk about the hyphenated American. This was a very popular talking point among the talk radio type people, the conservatives, for the past 10 years. Because, remember that weird period in our lives when we had to call black people African Americans, and that was like the rule. But it really did say something, I think, profound about the country, that you had to modify the descriptor American with African. You had to modify for an Hispanic. You had to modify what it meant to be an American to say you're an Hispanic American. You never heard that a European American, a Russian American, a this American, because implicitly American meant that you were of European descent. So very rarely did you hear white American or Italian American or something like that, but almost it was ubiquitous that you heard African American, Hispanic American. And it did say, like you said, that there are different experiences by these people in the country that can't simply be ignored. They can't simply be abrogated by the fact that, Rand Paul set up an economic freedom zone in the south side of Chicago. And so suddenly now we're all on the same playing field and we're all the same and everything's okay. So I think you're right. And it's stupid for conservatives or Republicans to pretend that doesn't exist. It's stupid for them to ignore that at the expense of, I think, a great opportunity to tap into something which is very real for people. You're right in the sense that conservatism, as created, the modern conception of it, as created by William F. Buckley, it orbits around the marketplace. It orbits around the free market. And Evola talked a lot about this, how capitalism and communism are essentially two sides of the same coin. They're essentially both concerned entirely with the material, both concerned entirely with unemployment rates and GDP and numbers about money. And for Republicans to focus solely on that, solely on the market and these kinds of quantitative concerns, as opposed to the emotional experiences, the heritage of people, it's a big waste. And so the future for the Republican Party is doing what Donald Trump did, which is to find implicit and intuitive ways to tap into that kind of thing. Trump's Make America Great Again, I think a lot of people were into it for the wall. A lot of people were into it because of trade. Some people were in it for health care. But Make America Great Again fundamentally was about something, I think, much deeper than that. It was about nostalgia for what we all know why we feel nostalgic for maybe 50 or 150 years ago. It wasn't because the economy was better. It was because the country was different. It had a distinct character. It had a distinct
when
culture.
Nick was a child, 60 years ago. Yeah.
That's right. When I have Benjamin Button disease, so I'm a boomer, but going backwards, right? Yeah. So in my youth, right? But it's true. Back to those kinds of times. Even the wall. Was the wall about immigration? Did people say the wall is the best way to solve illegal immigration? And I did the numbers and all that. Or does the wall communicate to people that this is America and this is Mexico, and there's a difference? And America's America and Mexico will be Mexico. And so that's the future of the right wing in the country. We have to, as Richard said, we would be, I think, foolish to ignore that. And I'll take it and call the right wing social justice warrior for that. I mean, these identities are important.